we only have one battery. Everything in life, including your relationships, including your time with your children if they're ill, the argument you had with your boss, all this stuff, and the training, it all drains that battery. And I don't have that constant reference point of a tanking CTL to kind of get the anxiety going again. I just go, well, I'm listening to my body. That is the only bit of tech I have at the moment. He was resting when he was tired, as opposed to thinking, oh no, I'm in the third week of a 3-on, 1-off. Of course I'm going to drive my CTL up. He had no idea what CTL was. He had no idea where he was in his training phase. We've been programmed to just be staring down at our bike computers. And what I always find amazing when you're watching pro races is guys who come over the finish line and they're like hanging over their bike. They are about to pass out, and still the first thing they do is stop their bike computer. But I'm doing the best Zone 2 ride ever at 230 watts, right at the top of my range. It's absolute bullshit. There is so much grey in between these zones. I think a guy who's done this unbelievably well, again, just grinding from the bottom, is Cam Jeffers. Like, I remember when some of his videos were literally him taking Lexi, his dog, out for a walk, and now, you know, he is doing very, very well. I've known you for a few years now. We coach you. We've hung out here in Girona, and I have been amazed at what you're a very talented athlete on the bike, that goes without saying. But what I have been also amazed by is how you have grown this now really substantial following. It's amazing engagement. These really like dedicated fans, predominantly on Instagram, unless I'm wrong. And I've seen that grow over the last couple of years, and you've done it just bottom up. It doesn't look like you've had anything handed to you. It's just been the grind, daily grind. And now, you know, you've got brands approaching you, Training Peaks approaching you, various brands looking to recruit your services, and you've kind of established yourself as, what are we calling it? Are we calling it being an influencer? How would you? Okay.
I don't like the word, but unfortunately it's the easiest way to describe pretty much what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, so they're essentially supporting their cycling career through being an influencer, at least their early cycling career, where they're not getting paid a chunky salary by a team. What would your advice be to those guys starting out?
The key to starting out is literally posting content, whatever it may be, whatever you want it to be, and making sure that you're enjoying it to start off with, because it's a similar concept to training on the bike. You want to make sure that you're having a good time. You want to make sure that you're not like overthinking it too much. At the outset, it's very much a case of just getting the ball rolling, because starting is the hardest part, because obviously, you know, you have this idea of what you want to be. You have these people that you look up to, that you want to be like, and you obviously want to be there like straight away, and that's just impossible. So you're going to have to, it's overcoming those barriers of saying, right, the first thing I put out, it's not going to be very good, but at least you've got it out there, and that's the way to get on the ladder, pretty much.
And how do you deal with stuff that you put out there that is negatively received? How do you deal with the comments, the keyboard warriors, the trolls?
I try not to think about it as much as I possibly can, but also the way I try and set my mind about it is that negative comments are just as good as positive comments, because negative comments, apart from anything else, that's feedback at the end of the day. So that's something, maybe, I mean, depending on what the comment is, hopefully it's not like, it's feedback and it's ways that you can improve and be better for next time. But also any comment is an engagement in my eyes. Engagement means, you know, more views in theory, more chances for it to get pushed on the algorithm. So, and in that sense, purely down to like the algorithm, any comment is well received, to be honest.
Okay, and then in terms of priorities, in terms of how you now shape your life, so you got a very successful career as an influencer. You were also on the path to becoming a professional cyclist. You wake up in the morning, you've got a big job from a brand who want you to promote their product. You're also in a big training block. How do you work your life around these two kind of contrasting parts?
So for me, I like to think of myself as a rider first and an influencer second, because the riding is quite single state. There's only one way I can ride. I have to ride at a certain point in the day, depending on the weather, depending on, light as well, especially in the UK winter. So I center my day around the rise, and then I work away around that, because at the end of the day, at the weekend, I'll be riding 4 or 5 hours, but even then there's like 10 hours of daylight. So I've got a good chunk of time in the day to ride. But in the middle of the week, I'm doing 2-3 hours. That's not a substantial amount of time. So I can make sure that I'll just get my ride done in the middle of the day when it's lightest and it's good. And then I can do all my content creation in the other parts pretty much, because the content creation can sort of happen when and if it works on the timetable. Because at the end of the day, to film the content will probably take, if, for example, I need to film stuff, here, then I'll do that, and I'll make sure I do that in the light. But editing it doesn't matter when that happens. I actually find that one of my most productive times is late in the evening, like 7-8 p.m. That's when for some reason, my creative mind goes worse.
That sort of leads on to a question that I was going to ask you, because having juggled a professional and a semi-professional cycling career around work myself for quite a few years, I know what it's like to be in a big training block, get home, and then have something to do where you have to apply your brain. The easiest thing to do is sit there and just like endlessly scroll on Netflix and just basically detach from reality, because you're in some sort of semi-comatose state. But when you have to engage, you have to do something which is actually creatively and at times academically quite demanding. What do you do if you are struggling to keep your eyes open, but you've got a deadline and you've got to get it done?
I find timetabling really important, certainly in the way that I run my life, essentially, because, as you say, juggling riding full time and doing like something that's obviously very mentally stimulating, it's very, very taxing, because you're pushing your body to the limit on the bike just purely physically, but then you're also pushing your mind to the limit in that sense. So you're doing two very strenuous tasks, which are going to pile on like fatigue. But if you make sure that I timetable my day out, so I make sure that when I get back from my ride, I'm getting out of my kit straight away. I'm getting showered as soon as I possibly can. Then I spend maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes eating my pre-prepared meal. I stretch, and then that's probably like an hour's period post-ride, at which point I say, no, I've got to lock in, sit down, like airplane mode on like Instagram's, TikTok, and just say, no, I'm gonna make this video. And I'll only allow myself to get to de-stress, to like log off mentally when I've got something. Maybe I'll set myself a goal, like I need to have this draft 50% done. I need to have a complete draft. I need to send this email off, and then I can done. And it's just, I think it's just sort of discipline at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something really important there, which is the fatigue of life that can't be compartmentalized. I talk to guys all the time who are like, oh, it might have been a really busy, stressful day at work, but I was sitting down all the time. It's like, yeah, to a degree, I understand what you're saying, but that psychological stress is draining. It is tiring. And the old cliche, well, we still use it, is we only have one battery. And everything in life, including your relationships, including, we coach a lot of guys who have young kids, your time with your children, if they're ill, the argument you had with your boss, all this stuff, and the training, it all drains that battery. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting and quite nuanced thing to do, to have to accommodate this other part of your life around the training. And actually at times, working with Andy and with us, say, well, look, this might have been on the plan, but you are clearly tired, so we need to adjust accordingly. Take it back a little bit. You've got a lot on in this other part of your life. Even though you're bike rider first, this needs to be supported by your influencing career. So at times, I guess the plan needs to work around what you're doing, work-wise as well.
100%. It actually happened last week, where I was in London and I just didn't have time, and I had to message him a couple of days before and said, realistically, I'm just actually not going to be able to ride on this day. And we actually had a little conversation about it. And it turns out that, as you say, I'd had a pretty big block before. I'd just done the first race, and he said, actually, you know what? Extra recovery day is not going to be the end of the world. In fact, it's probably going to help. So things like that, really good.
And how did that actually feel on like a sensation level? Because I know a lot of athletes, and definitely myself when I was racing, when I was told to rest and a rest hadn't been planned, i.e., rest on demand because of stuff that was happening in life or because I was more tired than my coach predicted or than I predicted, I found that really difficult. That kind of or what felt like missing a training, it felt like missing extra gains. And I will put a little caveat next to that. And I know full well as an experienced coach, that is not the case. But it's easy to tell someone else that. To actually tell yourself that and fully absorb it and feel it, I used to find really, really difficult. And I used to think, oh, okay, in that case, I'm going to go out I'm going to do a 10K walk. I'm going to do a 10K speed walk. I'm going to like adjust my calories accordingly. Those are all things I battled with. I wonder whether they are similar to things that go on with you, or whether you're just happy to take the rest day and crack on when you're feeling better.
I struggle mentally. I really struggle mentally with a forced rest day because, like you, I just think to myself, thing is, it's bad, but I live and I don't live and die by the CTL and training peaks, but obviously there's a number there, and which sort of says how much fitness you've got, and the number obviously on a rest day maybe stays the same or it goes down, and it does, and it's a very little thing, and it's not something. Obviously, like CTL's not like pinpoint accurate because it obviously can't measure like we were talking about, but it's just something that it eats away in the brain. It says like, oh, I normally train this day, I should be training this day, and I don't know what it is. My legs, I feel like I've lost something.
Absolutely. I can totally relate. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's it's a point I feel so strongly about, and I did have an unhealthy obsession with the metrics, even though I know how misguided it is to have that obsession, like the actual science of it. It is misguided to have an obsession with the metrics, which are the best metrics we have in the endurance sport world, but they are not accurate. They are not particularly accurate. They're a good representation and they're the best we have. But I'm actually doing a relatively interesting, at least I think interesting, experiment at the moment I'm doing 1 year of sporting or 1 year of competition abstinence, where I've got quite into running recently. But it became so apparent that every single time I put a race in my Training Peaks calendar, and I'm running as an absolute amateur, your equivalent of your weekend warrior runner at the moment. But if I put a race in Training Peaks, that became the most important thing in my life. And it's actually, I hate to admit it, but I'd be with my 2-year-old son on a Friday going swimming, and there would be a nagging thought in the back of my head, like, what's this going to do for me tomorrow for my 10K trail race? Like it became an irrational obsession, this having something in Training Peaks, monitoring the metrics, like it took up way too much space in my life, especially considering what else I have in my life, a family, a job, everything like that. So for a year, I think I'm about 3 months in now, no tech at all, nothing really? On my wrist, no turkey. Training Peaks, wow. Complete cold turkey, no Strava, no Training Peaks, literally recording nothing. And I'm going out and I'm running when I want to. And when my body is telling me not to, i.e. my legs are hurting, or I'm feeling a bit down, I'm feeling a bit low, I'm feeling a bit irritable, the world seeming a little bit darker than it normally does, and I sort of combine that with the physical feeling of pain in my legs. I'm like, okay, now it's time to stop. And it's not like I'm going to take one rest day like you should. It's okay, maybe I'll take 3 days off, maybe I'll take a week off. And I don't have that constant reference point of a tanking CTL to kind of get the anxiety going again. I'll just go, well, I'm listening to my body. That is the only bit of tech I have at the moment. And it's been amazing. And I think I've probably strung together the most consistent few months of exercise I've ever done, without getting ill, without getting overtired, without getting home from these runs and wanting to like kill everyone until I eat something. I'm generally just listening. I'm listening to my body. I'm really listening to my body. And I think it's something which particularly the younger generation, the guys in their teens who have grown up watching the power meter, watching their CTL, they have never ever had to do that. They've never had to listen to their body. They wake up and they're whoops like you're good to go, and they literally just like stagger out of bed and just like 6 hours, boys. It's like, okay, well, possibly, but how do you actually feel? And a lot of them can't tell you how they feel.
Yeah,
They can tell you what their watch says.
yeah, it's so metronomic these days, and it's fine. I find really interesting. I mean, I remember a time when I had a little bike computer, but it was one of those like odometer things. It was just like a little cat eye. It had a speedometer on it, and it told me how many miles I'd gone, but no like heart rate, power, anything like no metric. And I would just sort of go out and I'd come back, and I remember especially like in lockdown, because obviously I'm relatively new to cycling. It's only like performance cycling. Lockdown 2020, summer 2020, I didn't have a power meter, I didn't have any of this tech, so I was just going out and riding, and I was looking at things like average speed, and I was getting pretty tired, and I just thought, oh well, I'll just stop, and I didn't ride for like 4 or 5 days, and I could go out again, and I loved it. One of the best summers I've had on a bike from a fun perspective, and I really enjoyed it, and it's really good. I mean, now I have the numbers, and I really enjoy looking at the numbers, but part of me misses having that freedom of being like, oh, I don't know what's going on, so I'll just not ride. Or, you know what I mean?
Completely, and it actually really reminds me of my younger brother who rode at continental level, pro continental level, and he still says the best season he ever had, or the best 2 seasons, was when he was on Felt Colborne's, which were at that time like a good elite team. And he rode, and he was, everyone kind of knew him for this and laughed at him, but at the same time, I think was slightly, I think we're very impressed by it. But he just rode no power meter, no heart rate monitor, nothing. It was very late on that he actually got like a Garmin or something. Actually, you know what? He stagiaired for Sigma Sport and was riding Tour Series or certainly Elite Crits, coming top 10. And I remember a guy who was like, hey, where's your Garmin? How do you know kind of what's going on? He's like, oh, I don't have one. I just ride. And I guess the bell, they ring the bell, don't they, for the penultimate lap? And like, he was literally doing these like pro races and had nothing, had no tech. I mean, that's probably too far extreme the other way. But yeah, he still attributes like the best he ever felt on the bike, and actually relative to his level, the best results he ever got was when he was training himself, and he was just going out, and basically, to kind of condense everything that he would say about this, he was resting when he was tired, as opposed to thinking, oh no, I'm in the 3rd week of a 3 on 1 off, of course I'm going to drive my CTL up. He had no idea what CTL was. He had no idea where he was in his training phase. And then I am not suggesting this is terrible marketing for me as a coach. I'm not suggesting that is the way to do it, but it's very indicative of what goes on these days for people who get themselves into a terrible mess from being a slave to the numbers. He just didn't ride his bike when he was tired, whether that be for 1 day, 3 days, 4 days. That's what he did. That's all he knew. He didn't know anything about the coaching world, the CTL world. I will also say he was a very, very talented athlete. So he got away with probably some stuff which some people wouldn't. But I think it's an interesting little insight into this tech world we live in sport.
I think it's fascinating. I think the lack of knowledge helps with the feeling of sensation. I think it helps so much. I mean, for example, it actually happened to me at the weekend. I was riding. I had a 5-hour ride. 3 hours in, my Wahoo crashed, just blacked out. I was just completely dark for like 2 hours. And I was pretty bummed out because I like having a good number at the end. I like having the Ks, whatever, to put on the Strava. But actually riding, I actually mentioned it to Andy in my messages afterwards. I was like, you know what, actually it was really nice being in like dark mode. I was just, riding. And I mean, I know relatively when I'm on the bike, I know what zone 2 feels like, how to ride. And I was just sort of riding. I wasn't looking at the Wahoo. I was looking around. I was enjoying myself. I thought, actually really fun ride, really fun day out.
Yeah.
For once, I wasn't actually thinking about it.
Oh man, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. And I guess that's why we all started riding bikes. Yeah, like smashing your mates on the club run. That's good fun. But when you're on your own, like actually going out and seeing things, like so much further, you can go so much further than when you run. You can go and see the most beautiful rolling landscape, but we've been programmed to just be staring down at our bike computers. And what I always find amazing when you're watching pro races is guys who come over the finish line and they're like hanging over their bike. They are about to pass out, and still the first thing they do is stop their bike computer.
Oh my
Do
god.
you know what I mean? It's unbelievable
Probably
how
celebrate.
programmed they're.
Stops the wahoo.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. Before this, like in the most terrible states, in one of those mountaintop finishes where like they're wobbling and like someone has to help them off their bike, but they're still able to press stop on the
Yeah,
wahoo.
it's ridiculous.
Unreal.
I saw
Yeah,
Cav
yeah.
talk about this on his story recently, how he
Oh,
was
did
just,
he?
yeah, him and Morkov were in Colombia, and they were on his stories like he just couldn't believe it. He said, "Look, you lads, you can trim it afterwards. It doesn't matter. The
Yeah,
number
yeah, yeah.
at the end of the day, it really doesn't make a difference." So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Shit, I thought that was original content and Cav's already done it. Delete. Delete. I mean, something which we say all the time, and I think it's not news to anyone, but like the guys we coach, we so often say, particularly if they're in a little bit of a rut, say just go for a ride and put your computer in your back pocket and just ride, and turn around when you start to feel like, okay, I'm not feeling too great now. Obviously, ideally don't ride like 100 kilometers in one direction, but like, and you know, put your bike computer in your pocket, and if you're feeling great and there's a hill that comes up, yeah, give it a whack. If you're feeling shit, ride to the cafe, have some cake, ride home. Like, tune out from the numbers for a bit, you know, and then we'll gradually introduce a bit of structure again, and we can get very scientific about it. We do our really structured stuff on the indoor trainer if necessary, but we massively like that antidote to that physiological stress, that sort of slight on the edge of burnout. I think is so often just a few rides of computer in the back pocket and just go and have fun and just listen to the body.
Yeah, I often rest day with a wahoo in the pocket. I just like when I
Yeah.
don't have to buy numbers, I just leave the door, go out, ride, don't really think
Mm.
about it. Yeah.
And I think what you said actually, I remember now, which is so important. I know how zone 2 feels. I would, if I could, prescribe to relatively experienced guys every single endurance ride on rate of perceived exertion. The problem is we probably lose all our clients because everyone just loves staring at their power meter. But that is like, you know how endurance feels. And the fact is your endurance zone, even though I don't particularly like using the word zone, it's moving. It's like all your zones. It's connected to a functional threshold power, which in itself is a biochemical tipping point, which is moving every single day, depending on fatigue, depending on various other factors, depending on caffeine, depending on heat, cold, whatever. So actually, you know, pinning yourself at 230 watts, the top of your zone 2, being like, I'm doing the best zone 2 ride ever at 230 watts, right at the top of my range. It's absolute bullshit. There is so much gray in between these zones and what your zone 2 is on Monday and then what it is on Friday. It's unlikely to be, you know, dramatically different, but it's definitely a handful of what's either side. And the best thing you can possibly do is just go and ride at what feels like zone 2. Are you doing some work, but does it feel comfortable all the time? And actually what you see, especially if you're tired, especially if it's very hot, if you're under fuel, whatever it might be, you know, you'll get your heart rate decoupling from your power. But what guys do is they'll just keep the power going. And actually then the physiological stress on the body becomes more than zone 2. And then the adaptations become, well, you know, you get into that kind of dead zone of building significantly more fatigue versus the adaptation you're going to get from riding that hard. What you should really do in that instance, usually, is actually just let the power drop off a little bit. Listen to your body, let the power drop off a little bit. You're still going to be getting great endurance benefits, but you're not going to be accumulating this unplanned fatigue, which is then going to make your intervals 2 days later a bit shit because you're tired. So yeah, long rambling way around of saying, listen to your body, tune out from the power meter, and everything will be okay. No need to panic if your screen blacks out. How about you look at the lovely, beautiful scenery you're riding through and just enjoy it, live life.
Yeah, ride bikes, have fun.
Yeah, exactly. Bike is life. Okay, so let's say your cycling career continues on this great upward trajectory, and you get offered, you know, in a few years' time, a really good contract to go and race in Europe. You're racing Pro Continental, World Tour. If that happens, where do you see the influencing side of your life going?
Okay, this is a very good question, actually. So, one of the reasons, the whole reason I do the social media was probably because I enjoy it, but also one of the key factors of it for my influencing is essentially self-promotion. Getting a pro contract is pretty cutthroat world out there right now. Like folding, there's no money in the sport. You know, guys are doing more watts than they've sort of ever done before. So being a fantastic bike rider is obviously very important, but being very marketable is also very, very important.
Definitely.
Because that's where the money comes into the sport, and being able to go to a team and say, hey, look, I've got this watt per kilo, but I've also got these followers. If I'm coming up against John Smith, who's got the same watt per kilo, or maybe one or two better than me, but I've got the following and I've got the brands and I've got the experience online, that is a very valuable asset to the team. It means that I provide two things, and I'm one rider.
Absolutely.
The amount of riders that you see in the peloton now that don't engage in social media, they hate doing the PR stuff. They don't want to talk to the sponsors. They just want to ride their bike, rest. They're not really interested in any of that. And that's sort of, it's not a nightmare for the team, but it's frustrating that they have to put so much effort into pushing this guy into like promoting their product when, for example, I'm happy doing both. I enjoy doing both, and that's myself in 2 or 3 years' time. If I get offered the contract, that's something I'd be really interested in doing. Being able to sort of, I'd be the bike rider because I'm doing it now. I'm training however many hours it is, 15, 20 hours a week, like sort of as a semi-pro athlete basically. So I've got I can manage my time effectively. But if I'm a pro and I'm being paid to ride my bike, there's so much time in the day that I have to be able to create the content, to be able to do what the sponsors want me to do, whatever it may be. Because it's nice putting my feet up, but after a couple of weeks of 6 hours of the day just like scrolling on my phone, I've got time to be able to that I would happily use to edit videos, and that's the kind of thing. That's what I see myself doing, and that's one of the reasons I do the content.
Yeah, for sure. I guess Lachlan Morton's a good example of this. Like, undoubtedly an unbelievably talented bike rider, but where his career has gone more now, like I could be wrong, but I would expect he probably wouldn't still be with EF if he didn't have this incredible following and this amazing ability to tell stories and being marketable, being incredibly marketable.
Absolutely, and I think he's a dream for EF and Rafa and all the sponsors, Cannondale, because exactly as you say, he's so marketable. He's just this likable bloke who's just riding his bike for fun. It goes back to what we were talking about fatigue, and he doesn't really ride watts, doesn't ride the power meter, just goes out, enjoys his bike, and it's so relatable. And he doesn't really race for the team anymore. He's sort of just, in purely literal sense, he's just this bloke that's on the team, and he's just there, and he wears the kit, and he goes and rides ridiculous gravel routes in really quick times, but everyone loves it, and it's, as you say, it's brilliant marketing. I think he makes the most money back. I remember there was a stat about it hit the marketing team to focus on Lachlan Morton does more revenue than the whole of the EF team.
Absolutely. I could totally believe that. I mean, it's why so many of these brands are pulling out of big teams, or at least reducing their investment in big teams, and they're investing in guys like you. Because what do people really care about? Like a team, or do they care about a person? Like, people can get on board with your story, relate to you, you chat to them in the comments, they feel like they're on. I mean, I remember a very good friend of mine, and I think a guy who's done this unbelievably well, again, just grinding from the bottom, is Cam Jeffers. Like, I remember, I've known Cam for a long time, and I remember when some of his videos were literally him taking Lexi, his dog, out for a walk, and then going on a bike ride on the local chain gang. And now, he is, I think, by all measures of the world you're in, doing very, very well. And he has guys who have been on that journey with him who he's never met, but they feel like they're best friends with him, and he massively values that massively values them and their support. But I don't think many people would go on that journey with a cycling team, or at least not feel that real personal inclusion and engagement, like you are watching someone grow. And it's an amazing story for the guys who've been watching Cam since the beginning.
Oh yeah, I mean, that was me once upon a time. I mean, I watched the Jeffers vlogs back in the day and it's like a big for what I do. I remember watching him when he was on his club team, like his local team. I'm thinking like, oh, that's like him making videos and stuff. I'm thinking, oh, that's. I never really saw much like influencing or content around cycling before Cam, and then I saw him and thought, oh, it's actually kind of possible that someone could create content around riding bikes, and it's sort of like where the idea started to form. And this is like whatever it is, 10 years ago now, I can't even remember. But yeah, as you say, it's really interesting. I think that the big would rather spend a big amount for the single person rather than a big amount on a load of guys where maybe you're going to get 15%, 20% like kickback.
Yeah.
You look at
and
guys
often. Sorry, go on.
Look at guys like Rick Zabel on Israel. He's doing deals with like Porsche, and he's gone clear. He's right at the top and the guy he's so easily investable. He's this German sprinter, looks very good on a bike, very aesthetic, can do big watts. And he makes a good video. What it makes it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. All right, mate. I think we've got that's a wrap. End of part 1.